Now I'm going to be on mute, guys.
Welcome, everybody. Thank you for joining in today. We are broadcasting live from Florida. Where are you, Elton?
I am in California, near Los Angeles.
Los Angeles, California. And Elton, you are, and Todd, you are also?
No, I'm in actually Arizona. I'm in a
really?
town called Cave Creek that's just north of Scottsdale.
Been there many times. So if somebody on the call wouldn't mind just sending us a note, one of the attendees, and make sure that we're broadcasting. And we can't really tell unless you tell us, although we see you coming on here. That would be, just say hello in the chat box. That would be terrific. Just make sure we're getting out there. So again, welcome everybody. Thank you for spending your time with us today. You see two people on the call here, if you're able to. And one of them, they're both called Elton, but the Elton with the darker skin, let's just say that way, is the one that's responsible for all this. He has kindly introduced me to Todd. We have, just for the record, thank you very much for confirming we're broadcasting there, Carl. The intention of today is to talk about Todd's journey in his career and also how we're ending up with Endexx and what's going on in the marketplace. And so please feel free, and we encourage questions from the audience. And we can't see or hear you, but we definitely can see the chat box and the Q&A, and we encourage you to ask questions there as we go along, whatever comes to mind. Please feel free to do it as it comes to mind, and we'll get to as many as we can. We have lots of callers in today, attendees. So a little Zoom additional housekeeping. We are recording this, so we're going to post it on the Family Office Insights YouTube channel as a recording, so you can share it with others or review it as needed. The group will be happy to, as I said, as we go along here, answer any questions that you have. So with that, I'm going to hand it off to Todd and ask him to give a little background about his history and career and so forth, and then we can get into some questions, as many as we like, and do a little fireside chat interview here. So welcome again, and thank you all for being here. Todd?
All right. Thanks, Arthur. Thanks for having me here today.
Very welcome.
My life journey, here it goes. Actually, I started off as a licensed securities broker in the dusty little town known as Chicago. It was 1990. It was right, we were still climbing out of the crash in 1987. The market was still figuring out its way, and I got my Series 7 securities license in Chicago, and I jumped in headfirst, not knowing anything about the stock market, but quickly became a professional. Over the first 5 years in the industry, I did 150 IPOs. I brought companies public. I raised, just in IPOs alone, back then, deals used to come public with $3 million, $5 million, $15 million was way out there until the internet kicked in. And it was exciting. I became a specialist in biotechnology. That was a really big thing in the early 90s, laser technology. So I was working on a lot of cutting edge technologies that were being introduced to the market, still conceptually, but they had foundational sciences, and they were starting to emerge as practical uses in the world of medicine and the world of making microchips and all these different applications. It was very exciting for a young man, learning how to be a good stockbroker, be a good fiduciary for his clients, and really plan out things long term. 1995, I changed from just doing an IPO and being a special in that area. I developed some trading algorithms to help create efficiencies in decision making of when to buy and sell stocks. I never lacked for ideas on what to buy. There were so many great ideas out there, and you would immerse yourself in these companies and build very large positions for your client base, only to have the rug pulled out from underneath you. The question was always, why? I know everything. I know the management. I've raised the money. Everything is going well with these companies. Why are they failing? Why suddenly are their stocks falling out of bed when nothing's really that different? So after I built the algorithms, they were a series of checks and balances from a math side of the equation, and also evaluating behavior of markets. So instead of looking at, is it a technical graph up or down, I looked at it, what's a composite behavior of the different types of people looking at the market. And what I had, it took about a year to develop, but once I got to that point, I assembled it into the 1 month trader that included all the day traders and the guys that, weren't very good at long-term decision making, just wanted in, out, I'm good or bad. Then I looked at the quarterly guy who looked at the quarterly results. They made their decisions that way. And then the next composite was the 1 year guy, the institutional investor that looked at it and said, all right, they had a good year. I'm going to add to my position. I'm going to retract from my position. And I kept building the math around those groups. Now 25 years later, it's still very successful. It's still in the high 80 percentile mathematically correct on when to buy and when to sell stocks. Doesn't matter if it's a stock, a bond, an ETF, a commodity, or a bond, or a Bitcoin. Even today, the math still is the same. Humans are the acting behavior behind the whole market. 2000, I retired. I made 3 really big deals in a row. One of those was internet, one of those was biotech, and one of those was a grocery cart technology for couponing. But I made 3 really big scores, and it was right before the crash, in March of 2000. And I had my market and my models had predicted there was a coming pullback, and I didn't want to sit through another one. So I retired. I made my money. I advised my clients. I kept my family office clients. I kept my large retail investors on board. And I started consulting for small public companies that didn't know how to manage. And what I did is I took that math model and moved it into the idea of how can a CEO not be the guy that gets the rug pulled out from underneath him? So I layered the math model into how can public companies manage their business cycle, manage their information cycle into being a successful company. Instead of worrying about the stock price on a daily basis, start looking at it differently. Start looking at it on a month, a quarter, a year out, forecast and produce into the math model versus me telling you what the math model's telling you. So when I did that, companies started going from 5 cents a share, 25 cents a share, $2 a share. They were getting up to $3, $5. They were going up exponentially because they weren't over managing the expectations of their shareholder base. They were performing their business and then matching that into the behavior and decision making of their new investors or their long-term investors. And with that, it gave me a really good working knowledge of how to manage public companies. The company I'm involved with right now was one of those companies. I invested in it. I raised them a couple $1 million. It was a good biotech technology, and management just got ahead of themselves. I gave them every tool that they needed. Their stock ran from $1 to $14, and then they wanted to tell the world they had the cure for HIV. They didn't have the cure. They had good test results from a test that we financed in the Ivory Coast in Africa that helped people go from gonna die, stage 4 HIV, to asymptomatic in a reasonable amount of time. That didn't mean the HIV was gone. It just means it helped their body recover. That's not a cure. And management just was so elated and so beside themselves. They scheduled themselves a nice little conference with the news channel in Florida, and they came out and said, we have the cure for HIV. And the next thing you know it, knock, knock, knock. We heard that you know someone who knows someone, and then they were basically just buried by the SEC in a lawsuit attached to another public company. But that's how government can sweat out these small companies. It's the things you can't see. It's the little mistakes you make today that compound a year from now, 3 years from now, that are the issue. So this is one of those companies I took over and cleaned it up and built an incubator out of it and started building little small companies. And I used those principles from the 90s and the early 2000s on more about what not to do than what to do. There's only a few things that really work. Being successful is one, executing your business plan is another, and don't go into debt. Don't go into debt to a point where you can't service that debt. Those were the 3 primary things that kept companies in business. There's a whole bunch of things that put companies out of business. So for me, it was, that young guy from the early 90s who was a science guy, a math guy, who really didn't understand why stocks went up and down, and nobody could explain it. I would talk to guys that were in the business for 20, 30, 50 years, and I go, hey, it is what it is. That's just the way it is. Don't worry, this too shall pass. They had 1,000,001 excuses, but they never had a reason to invest at the right time. So when I actually transferred that into my investors, we were going into companies and buying a couple million share position at exactly the right time. And instead of making 10 or 20% on an annualized basis, we started making 50%, 100% on an annualized basis per company. We were making 15% on average per trade. So we were able to go in and out of a company 2 to 3 times a year and never lose faith in the company, but optimize our value in our investment strategy. If the scope was a long-term investment, we knew when to get in and when to get out, or hedge our position to not go through another downturn. And just that thinking and that cleaning up of the decision making for investors, they went from being that average everyday person that once in a while they would get the big score and they would have to wash out all the bad ones that they had left in their trail. Or the guy that was sitting there going, yeah, one time I had a stock that went from $1 to $10. I didn't sell a share. Now it's at 2 cents. Well, the system allowed people to make that decision, to make effective decisions and not be affected emotionally. They would just say, yes, I made a decision today. I'm happy with the decision. I can make another one tomorrow with the same exact criteria with the same exact company. So that was my journey, my journey in knowledge and wisdom and pain and suffering and success. You put them all together, and in the end, we're now in 2021. I've been in the business now for almost 31 years, and more times than not, I'm very successful in my deals. I don't make 15%. 15% is, I don't go in unless I can make minimum of 15%. So to be an average and trade alongside the market and just barely beat the market or barely below the market, I'm not interested in that. I'm interested in capitalism. I'm interested in young companies becoming successful. And if they manage themselves the way a big company should manage, but don't always, they can be successful faster and get there, in a much more expedited fashion with a lot less bruise and bumps and scars on their body.
Todd, is it fair to say that overlay or methodology was largely for public companies that you had enough information about to make those decisions, or have you been able to apply it to private companies as well?
I can't really apply it to private companies because there's not a trading instrument. If there's a trading instrument, there's an audience. And if there's an audience, there's behavior. And for every individual in that audience profile, there's composite math that affects the herd, that affects the mob, that affects the individual. So there's all these different components along the way. For private companies, you could do it if you're managing to the market. So if you're a private company and you're manufacturing microchips and you want to know where microchip prices are, this math model will apply to the microchip market, to the underlying commodities, to the things that affect the cost of goods inside that company. So the math does apply directly to those items because they're all interconnected through the open market. The private company just needs to know how to utilize that math model and apply it to their decision making. Maybe it's not the best time to always do just-in-time purchasing. Maybe you need to buy a bulk of silicon when no one else is buying. So there's ways to manage it into a normal business decision-making tree, but you have to know what you're applying it to.
Fair enough. I know you're going to get to it, but maybe this is a good time. You decide. How does this apply to the current enterprise that we're talking about, Endexx and CBD, and not calling it the right thing? But how have you applied this to the company that we'll be talking about next week in Family Office Insights? Or do we have a few steps of evolution that you want to talk about before that?
Sure. in 2013, I had looked at the cannabis market as a private entrepreneur and to see where it was from a compliance standpoint, to see where it was from a functional industry standpoint, because it certainly wasn't a commodity yet. You know, you had regional spots around the country that had some legality wrapped around it, like California. So the cost of the material, the marijuana plant, was sustained a very high value because they had good control of the market. As the market started to expand, those controls, normal controls came in. More production went in, and then the cost of goods started, the cost of product to the market went down because they're all competing for the same buyer. I looked at the industry, you know, first from a compliance. Is it cost prohibitive to be in it? Do the governments, independent governments, state governments know what they're talking about, know what they're doing? Do they know how to regulate it? Do they know how to, or are they just going to punish people who are in the industry through taxation or penalties or licensing? So in the early stages, I went into it as kind of a research. We built a seed to sale tracking system. And the tracking system was systems that I had built in previous companies, software as a service, compliance methodologies for managing opioid intake from doctors, patients, pharmacy. And we applied all of those methodologies into the cannabis space and presented this new way to track a product. When you track a drug, it starts off at the manufacturing facility. They put a bunch of ingredients in, they have one drug, and it goes out, and it's easy to track. Marijuana starts off as one plant and becomes many things going out. So you have to reverse look at the market. How do you maintain all these pieces that it becomes? So we looked at it at a very granular level, and then we started looking at I started applying it to the same things I had seen in biotech, which was a very fair thing. In the early 90s, we had a big bubble in biotech. You could throw anything out there with the word biotech on it and say it was going to cure something 10 years from now, and the stocks would go up. It was crazy. There was a ton of money. And this is pre-ton of money internet in the Y2K boom. So back then, you could raise $50, $100 million and go try to develop a technology that may or may not even exist. I looked at the cannabis industry as there's a whole bunch of molecules here. They all could be uniquely their own thing. There's also, how do you comply? Who do you work with to create compliance? What rules and regulations are people going to follow? So in the end, what I really looked at is I converted my thinking after looking at it on a granular level into a biotech. What's the number one molecule in this plant? What's the safest molecule in the plant? What has the greatest attributes to it that could potentially become a commercial property? And it just kept, the one thing that kept sifting to the top was CBD. So we set out on a path right there where I said, all right, the first thing we need to do is figure out, how much do you take? Everybody was saying, hey, you smoke a little of this if you feel good, you smoke a little of that if you feel bad. You know, I was in these dispensaries listening to bud tenders telling people how to cure themselves with marijuana. And I knew it was just a dangerous, dangerous enterprise. So I recruited some doctors I worked with previously in other biotech companies and other pharma tech companies. And I said, can we do a trial where we can say, here's a delivery method, here's an amount, we'll start very low, and then we'll work it up until we find an average therapeutic value for patients, and see if we can take one type of patient group and get a benefit. And if it's consistent, then we have figured out a dosing platform per a delivery platform. So we initially started off with vaping, because that was the big thing. Everybody was vaping. They were getting, in the THC world, they were just getting loaded on vaping. They were smoking almost 100% concentrations of THC, passing out and being dysfunctional. So we started off with a vaping mixture, and we slowly raised the amount of CBD that was in it. And on a group of patients, the first 20 patients were patients that were diabetics. They had diabetic neuropathy, which was a nerve pain. And the way to measure the nerve pain is, if I ask you, Arthur, what kind of pain are you in? I'm about a 7 out of 10. And Ellen goes, I'm a 9 out of 10. I'm very rarely do I get below 8. I can't tolerate this. And then I might be a 3 that sometimes it flares up a little bit. So we had 20 patients, and they all had this neuropathic condition. we started applying the CBD to it. Within 1 week, the majority of the patients had dropped almost 50% in pain related to neuropathy. And they were saying, this is something we could live with. And it didn't take long to get to that. It was a very small microdose of CBD that allowed people to experience something. So right then we knew we were convinced we had something. So we extended out that trial. Then we added oil tinctures and we got the dosing and the concentration levels there. Then we did a capsule formulation, and then we did some topical solutions. And across the 400 or so patients that we've treated, we've achieved the same results on all of the delivery platforms by figuring out dosing first. So there's a math model to dosing. There's a math model to how people perceive pain, how they perceive anxiety, how they perceive, they can't really perceive inflammation, but they perceive the symptoms associated with the inflammation. So we had to evaluate perception and feedback and subjectivity in that patient, in those patient groups, and then try to get some math models that were much more simplistic than the algorithms.
And how long ago was that?
We started that in late 2014 was our first trial. And then it's been ongoing. We were doing trials up until COVID started. So I had one doctor in the field that had a little over 100 patients, and we were providing these dosing regimens and platforms to all of them in conjunction with their other medication. And some of the observations we made at that time were people are taking less of the addictive or really hard on their stomach, digestive or sleeping patterns. They were taking less of those medications because they didn't have the same symptoms. So the introduction of CBD into their treatment cycles was reducing their need for other medications, at least at the dosing range that they were at. They couldn't just go cold turkey, but they could start weaning themselves down and taking much less of the medications with the knowledge of the doctor. If you go back to the very beginning, when we first introduced this to these patients, diabetic patients are not a single symptom. They have a myriad of issues. Inflammation has wrecked their bodies, and they may be dealing with 7, 8, 15 different conditions that they're constantly trying to get balanced out through medication. We saw a ripple effect. So the podiatrists that were using it to treat the neuropathy in the feet were then getting phone calls by their other practitioners, their neurologists, their gastroenterologists, their cardiologists, all the other people who were prescribing medications, because it was affecting the numbers in the other doctors' charts. And there was no explanation. So we were, let your doctor know that this is what you're doing. You've introduced a naturally occurring molecule. It's called CBD. None of the doctors knew what CBD was. It was just an acronym for something they had no clue about. And that ripple effect affected the entire treatment of that patient, starting with the foot doctor. So that one little guy with that one little molecule affected their entire treatment plan over the course of time. So, we started saying, all right, you have to introduce this to your doctor. Here's the dosing level that you're going to take. You need to notify them that this is what you're doing, and then let them make adjustments to your medication over time.
Is it also the ripple effect? Was it largely positive with the other ailments of that same patient?
Yeah, it was the simple things. It was sleep. It was pooping properly. A lot of people who are on a ton of medications, it has such a destructive process inside their stomach and their GI tract that they don't poop right. They're not hydrated correctly. They're not getting nutrient absorption correctly. So we saw some of those early things. Those were starting to resolve because they were just simply taking less medication that was toxic to their system. Then sleep. The patients that were getting up 3 to 5 times a night were now only getting up once or twice a night to go pee. And then they weren't getting stuck in insomnia cycles. So they would get up and they were able to go back to sleep without getting unrestful or being up for 2 or 3 hours before they could exhaust out again. So we saw those really basic things on the early feedback. And then it was simple things like, I can reach my coffee cup in my cabinet now. I had to keep everything on the counter before because that was a chore, just mobility issues. So the things that were clearly observable, those were the things that were, really standing out in the early phase.
you weren't the only company, for example, that were seeing the merits and the benefits of CBD. Was this sort of a wave or movement that others were discovering the same thing that you were?
I think they were seeing the same results and having the same observations, but they weren't doing in a clinical matter. They weren't trying to figure out dosing, and they were just saying take CBD. Well, how do you take it? If you're taking it orally, there's a concentration. If you're inhaling it, there's a concentration. If you're swallowing it, if it goes into the stomach, it doesn't do that much. It's like a vitamin. You get a very nominal amount of absorption. When you bypass the stomach and get to the small intestine, your absorption rates and results go up. So nobody methodically did it like that. That's when I say I treated it like a biotech. In the world of natural molecules, if a molecule works inside your body doesn't need much. You know, you don't have to swallow 1,000 milligrams of vitamin C to get the benefits of vitamin C. But the market sells it more, extra strength, more. And, you know, that's a marketing piece. It's a behavioral and a perception piece in the world of marketing. So the key is what's the fundamental baseline? And then you can always elevate from there. So you find the baseline and you build your science, you build your foundation of formulation on the base science, and then you can add. So I don't know of anybody else doing that. If you look at GW Pharma, for instance, they weren't testing at 2 milligrams or 5 milligrams. They were testing at 150 milligrams per 60 pounds of body weight. There is no application we've seen that requires that. None. It's just not necessary. The most I've seen anybody take and achieve a fair value was around 20 to 25 milligrams. And that was when you're targeting the stomach or the intestine. And you can actually get away with a lot less by not taking, your body just does, it gets rid of it. If it doesn't need it, it's not going to use it. So we have a lot of theories, a lot of concepts, and they're proven concepts, you know, and biotech is like that. It's in the early stages of biotech, they would come out with a biotech molecule, and then the testing was still kind of the old school pharmacology. Take as much as you can until you get sick and then back it down just enough. That was it.
Not very
and then
scientific,
if
right?
you got too sick, then you had another medication to take care of that medication and those symptoms. In the world of biotech, it's kind of like eating food. You know, you don't have to eat 10 pounds of broccoli to get the value of 10 pounds of broccoli. You just have to eat a little bit, and your body grabs those nutrients and sets it aside, goes and places it where it needs it. That's how nutrients work inside the body. So the beauty of the CBD system is it's a whole different system. It's an actual system that's in the entire body that takes the molecules and utilizes it. And not all of them are intake molecules inside from the cannabis plant. THC is an intake. It binds with the receptor and it goes inside a cell. That's why it's good for cancer and some other viral type infections. The CBD kind of communicates. So if it'll tell the immune system, hey, here's some cancer, you want to come and get this. You know, that's a loose translation, but it's more of a signaling molecule. So it's telling the organs, it's telling the nervous system, it's telling the brain, the immune function, where it's lacking and helping it bridge the gap. That's why it's so uniquely different. And none of these can be patented. So none of this can be patentable. You know, naturally occurring molecules are non-patentable, non-enforceable.
So aside from the rhetoric that we hear, how important is it to have quality standards? You know, how good the CBD is, because it's, I'm going to make some comments that are probably not right because I'm uninformed, but it's unregulated in terms of the quality of the CBD. Is this an issue? Are we hearing about it because it is an issue, or it's not an issue?
Yeah, you're hearing about it. You know, there's been CBD in the market for a while, and it was coming out of China, and most of it was synthetic. So it wasn't even a natural molecule. So the big risk with a plant like cannabis, or especially hemp, that strain, hemp pulls everything. when it's growing, it pulls everything from the soil, everything from the water, everything from the air, and it gets absorbed into that plant. And I tell people, you really have to think about it like wine. The grape, you could have the same grape in 20 different spots around the world, and it's going to taste differently from each one of those spots. So hemp is the same way. It's a remediator of soil. It's a remediator of water. It cleans the earth and the atmosphere and absorbs it. So depending on where the hemp grows at will determine whether or not could be some quality or safety issues. So coming out of China, there's coal deposit. There's a ton of toxins in the surface of the soil because they burn so much coal over there, or they really don't care about the standards of the soil. When I first got in the business, I walked my first 5 fields. I took a soil sample and I took a water sample. And if they had any type of heavy metal that the plant could pull, I couldn't use those crops. Now, there's a whole bunch more farmers now out there that growing in a whole bunch of different types of soil. So if they're using old farmland, they may be pulling up toxins or residual solvents and residual materials that came from old fertilizers or old pesticides. So they can pull from that environment, and that's where there is safety. So it needs to be regulated. And oil, when you extract oil, it's still the best substance from the plant from an overall beneficial standpoint, but it also carries the most risk because it has all of that potential material in there. So you have to test, and the majority of people that are early stage adopters of the hemp industry, we've all been building the compliance standards, the quality standards. The majority of our labs are now have an ISO certification. They have the right testing tools to test for all of these things that we've seen emerge as issues in the market. There's a whole bunch of people who don't care. They don't care what the quality is. They just want to make sure the word CBD is on that box and that they can market it for a little bit higher price than if it didn't have CBD in it. The quality of the products that are in the market, the finished goods, is where there's a lot of issues as well. People are just shoving. I was a keynote speaker in 2014 at a thing called Weedstock, and all of these investors were there. They were all brilliant traders because the marijuana market just made the big boom. And I told them, I was talking about compliance. I was talking about booms in the market. I was telling them things that I had experienced in the past and where their risk lied. But in the beginning, they just, I forget exactly what tangent I was going off on there, but in the beginning, there was just no knowledge of what these plants did and how they could really negatively hurt people. And it's not necessarily from the individual molecule, it's the whole process. It's the whole quality control, the whole chain of custody. If there's a weakness in that handling of the material, you have risk. And the idea that we can self-monitor from inside the industry, it's always in principle the best way to do it, but you still have to have standards from a government level. And my recommendation and my lobbying has always been on the side of weights and measures. You have to be able to measure something so you can comply to that measurement. And if if it's based on volume or weight or mass, then you have to know what it starts off at and what it shrinks down to. So at each one of those stages, when you're changing the disposition of the material, you have to test it.
So I heard that the UK has instituted some sort of process to regulate it. And I heard you say regulation has to be done or is a good thing. And editorially, I'm saying that sounds like it makes sense to me because there are always going to be players who want to cut corners, i.e. the Chinese or others, right?
Right.
How do you see that progressing in the US?
I think they're relying on the states right now. The states are the most in tune with what's going on in the market. And the way the USDA, the way the Congress has pushed the responsibility of regulation into the U.S. Department of Agriculture, I think that was actually, they got that right. And from a state agricultural department, that's where you can get the power plays, the over-regulation. So there needs to be some standard, which would be the USDA, and then the states need to be working together and helping create an industry instead of smashing down people who are trying to make a living or trying to do it right. The best way to do that is to create a regulation that people can comply to. If it's different in every single state, how do you comply? How do you do interstate business? How do you conduct yourself in a way that is universally approved or prudent? And those are still the challenges that are building out in the market. When, you know, we're only 2 years now, we're 2 years into a federally legal market. We're 7 years now into the pilot program, and we've had, you know, last year there was something like 3,800 to 4,000 CBD brands out there that were going to the market in 2020. At least 30% of them are out of business now, and there needs to be another 70% of them out of business. They're product hucksters. You know, they're trying to move product and sell a hot name. They'll be on to the next big trend after this. In the end, you'll have 30 major players that really influence the market and help, you know, create the standards for the market. And we're still in that really wavy growth cycle of a boom and a new product cycle. So there's a lot to learn, and I don't know, it's frustrating, you know, when you know what needs to be done. I actually, you know, I'm never a big fan of what the government does, but they by putting in the hands of the USDA, I think that was their first good step. You know, if they do that with cannabis also, that's going to be a good step. You know, what do they need to regulate for cannabis? You know, they'll grow pot in the back of an old pickup bed. They don't care. They know there's a buyer for whatever that product is. There's no standards there, especially. There's more standards in hemp than there is in the marijuana industry.
A little swashbuckling going on as expected in a nascent market, I guess.
Yes.
But like you said, those people will likely get X'd out just by the evolution of people doing it the good and smart and arguably the right way. What caused a company like Walgreens, if I misspeak, let me know, consider your product worthy of putting on the shelf?
I think they looked at us from a compliance standpoint first. Is this company compliant? How do they conduct themselves as a company? You know, they need to mitigate their own risk by the conduct of their purveyors. So the companies that ended up on shelf in Walgreens, by not 100%, but for the most part, we're trying to make high quality products and be very compliant through the entire manufacturing cycle. So that was impressive. There were other companies that did not. You know, they just created an entire section for CBD. They threw everything they could in there to see what would sell. And they sold a lot of really awful product. So in the end, that hurt the consumer, and it hurt those stores because they were not selective in their choice. They didn't put products on shelf that actually worked. They put products on the shelf that had the word CBD on it. So, you know, a company like Walgreens, they're the most conservative of all the companies that I've met, and after meeting the majority of the buyers in the United States. They still are not, from a compliance standpoint, they don't want us to advertise that we're there. They want to see the market naturally come in. So if you just happen to be in the paint aisle at a Walgreens, you trip, fall, hit your ankle, and look up and say, ooh, CBD, that's the level of marketing that we have right now. So you have to rely on external marketing, you know, from a branding standpoint. If you know of 2 products that are by brand name on shelf at Walgreens out of 5, you're likely going to pick one of the brand names that you know, unless you've heard from somebody else say, hey, I tried this product over at Walgreens, you should try it also. That's the only way the marketing is. Now you have other companies out there that want you to blast $20 million, $100 million of marketing and advertising out there to help them move it off their shelf. That's an overkill also. You know, there's some of our biggest competitors right now got themselves in a position where they raised a ton of money. They overspent on shelf placement and marketing. They couldn't generate enough revenue to pay for the marketing and advertising, or not the marketing and advertising, but the debt that they used to do the marketing and advertising and the product placement. So it threw a lot of the math models out of kilt. You know, for one of the rules of thumb in marketing in the retail world is 10% of your revenues needs to go into marketing and advertising to support a product that's on shelf. So if you're doing $20 million of revenue, you got to advertise $2 million worth. That's an old rule of thumb, but it still applies.
So let's be clear for the audience. What's the brand on the shelf of your product?
Well, we have our master brand is CBD Unlimited. And then we have sub brands underneath there that have been built and introduced over the years, like Maggie's. Maggie's Balm and Mist were our first two topicals, still the two most popular products we have. At Walgreens, that brand is called Balmex and Mistexx. And the reason it's called Balmex and Mistexx is because we actually we reformulated the Maggie's product so it would qualify for OTC analgesic certification. So it's actually a medicine that a doctor can recommend. They can, and that was where the compliance came in for someone like Walgreens. They said, well, this is actually a certified OTC product that's sitting there on shelf that just happens to have CBD also. So in the end, that's a super performance product. You know, it's on contact, pain relief, and other benefits. It's one of those things you got to use it to know what it really does. So that's one of the key brand names that's out there.
What was a question from the audience about your involvement, if at all, now or in the future in the cannabis space?
Cannabis is, if you're an American listed company, so we're a publicly traded company in the U.S. trading on an American exchange. Federally speaking, you still cannot market and sell cannabis on the marijuana side and then claim the revenue. That's changing. Those critical pieces started to change in November. First, there was a ruling in a foreign market in the European high court system that cannabis, marijuana, and specifically CBD were non-narcotics. So it was a 8-9 year lawsuit that was going on over there that allowed for an international court to rule that this is not a drug. It's not in the same class as heroin, cocaine, LSD, or anything else. That was rule number one that took place. Immediately following that, the UN then voted to decriminalize and deschedule cannabis. That was the number one rule that's been holding back the market. In the pre-1960, there was a whole bunch of industry things going on out there that wanted hemp out of the market. So they made sure once and for all that hemp was no longer going to be in the market. They didn't know it had all these benefits, but they got rid of cannabis and hemp, lumped it all together to the UN law of 1961 that prevented anybody internationally that complied with UN law to work in that cannabis or hemp space. That's been now knocked off the table. So as soon as that happened, then the Congress made their announcement 4 or 5 days later that they were going to deschedule and decriminalize marijuana. The US could not take the lead on it because they were the ones that lobbied the UN to get that rule in the first place. So there's your new ripple effect on legality. For us, as a cannabis, I went internationally on that piece. I was invited to go join by the Minister of Health in Jamaica to come to Jamaica and help apply some of these methodologies, these compliance measures, these regulatory matters, and be an influence on the Jamaican new legal cannabis industry. It's been slow going. They've been hard to get organized and hard to be stable over there, but we did apply for licenses. We applied for a license for retail and exportation and also for cultivation and farming. So we can use that as a pilot program for us to introduce a product into the local community, work with the doctors there if they truly want to prescribe it as a medicine, and then secondarily bring a brand name like ganja from Jamaica into the world in a safe format, not on a speedboat. So, it created a very interesting opportunity. How will we recognize the revenue? We have to take two steps. We have to take one of two steps. We either have to wait till the federal government in the U.S. legalizes it so we could claim the revenue, or we have to move that asset into a jurisdiction outside the U.S. that can recognize the revenue legally and be taxed properly. So there's a strong likelihood that we could move any cannabis assets we have into a Canadian listed company and then claim the revenues that way, unlock further value for our Endexx, our shareholders.
So there's a couple of questions from two different places in the audience, but they're related. So uh, what's the edge you have over your biggest competitors, if you care to mention who they are? And what's the scalability of your sales, for example?
In the initial phases, we just wanted to make the better product than anybody in the market. So that was the original edge. We had science, compliance built into products that actually worked, and over the years have created a very high rebuy rate. So being a small company, you have to be successful first in what you're doing. Second is distribution. How do you get it out to the market without spending every dollar you have only on marketing and advertising? Because you can waste a lot of money doing that. So we've been through a series of distribution relationships, and what we were really looking for was a national distributor that actually had boots on the ground salespeople, not just a phone, not just an order or catalog, somebody who goes out, knows their client, says, trust me, I know this product sells well. Let's put some of this on shelf and see how it does. So last March, right at the beginning of COVID, in fact, I did the first training on March 5th in Oregon for a group of these, the new distributor that we were signing with. That was it. That was literally the next day was COVID 101. That was March 6th. So March 5th, I did the training. So we signed our contract in March, and we were supposed to launch in May and June, but we couldn't because we were launching in we were going to launch in Portland and in Seattle. So it was a nightmare. It was a nightmare to do anything. So we took some time there, and we actually reformatted some of the products, created a new price point model, and now that the distributor is actually rolling out in earnest as of January 6th. They've opened at least 100 stores so far, and they're on track this year to probably bring in anywhere from 10 to 25,000 new stores. So over the course of time, these guys really are the biggest and best distributor of all. That's an edge. To my knowledge, there's only about 4 or 5 other companies that they're carrying product in, and they were companies that could comply and show the compliance tools as well. So we collaborated with them and said, here's what the pain points we've seen in compliance and regulation. Here's what you can use your policy and guidelines to introduce into the market. So we work with our customers to make sure that they're going down the right path, and they're not spinning their wheels. They're not overly concerned about things that they don't need to be, but really focus on the things that they need to be in this industry. And then the third thing is we've tried, initially we were trying word of mouth, referrals. That's how we built our business in the early stage. We opened up about 2,000 mom and pop stores, doctors, veterinarians, all these different groups, and that would breed into those regional areas. Now we've got a major influencer. We've tried independent affiliates where each one of you on your own website could be a product referral for us. That's an okay way to do it, but we were looking for something bigger. So with our partnership came some introductions into some very well-known, it can be household name, but very large demographically known celebrities that were in the path of wellness. So we landed back in October, we finally closed the deal with DJ Khaled. And, for guys our age, we're not necessarily familiar with him unless you've seen the Geico commercial where he's the motivational toothbrush coach. That's how I knew who he was. But he's a massive music producer. He takes acts that are struggling or acts that used to be the biggest, and he puts them back at the top. So he's a music producer, and he's a cool dude, and he's also a family man now. He's not just the music producer. And he's going down that path, in the second half of life. I want to live a healthy life. I want to be here for my kids and my wife. And he kind of fit all the parameters that we're already marketing to, but he brings a whole new demographic of young people that look at him as a major influence in their life. So you bring those things together, and then we believe that off of his success, we'll have offshoots of other celebrities that are looking for either a single product, line extensions for us, where we can take our technology and create a brand for whomever the next big star is, or whoever is an aging star that is going down this path. So I have to be careful on some of the things I talk about there.
Yeah. Well, this is private, but we can edit things out if need be. Totally get it. Can you talk a little bit about what is the next step? You know, maybe a little bit about sales, how's it going, what your forecasts are. You're going to be doing some sort of uh, uh, adjustment with the company in terms of its listing, uh, that sort of thing.
Yeah, so when I took this company over a long time ago, it was a bit of a mess. I thought my investment was dead. I thought my investors' investment was dead. So I did a general cleaning of it. I scrubbed it up, and that's when I started this incubation. So we were investing in different pieces and different technologies over time. When the cannabis space came up, I said, this is something we could really sink our teeth in. And so I took over the company and I said, let's build it to the point where we have to do certain things. One of those is we wanted to uplist the company. So I told the investors back then, I said, listen, give me a couple years on this thing. Once we're into cash flow positive and we've got most of our development costs out of the way, I'll make sure that we reapply to be a full-time or fully reporting SEC corporation. We've been publicly traded since 1997, but we went from 2004 till just last week as a non-reporting company, which just means we don't file our 10Qs and 10Ks into the SEC. We file them into OTC markets. Now we're fully audited. We're fully compliant with PCAOB auditing, which is for public companies. So we have all the critical fundamental things in place, and we have had for the last 8 years. Now I filed the Form 10. The Form 10 is a real critical piece. It's basically your IPO form that you file with the SEC. So we're a publicly traded company that's refiling IPO documentation. That makes us fully reporting. We will now file our Qs and our Ks into the SEC, and that allows institutions to participate. So institutions right now look at our company and go, oh, you got a great company, you're in the right industry. We can't invest in you because you're not fully reporting. And the second thing is your price of your stock is too low. We're not allowed to buy that. So it mitigates the ability for us to attract a larger investment group. We have 10,000 plus investors that own the float. And that is all organic. We've never had to do a pump. We've never had to do any promotions to move stock or do any of those crazy things that small cap companies do. And I think mostly it's because of my background. I know how to grow a company without destroying a company. And now that we have the Form 10 in place, we have the audited financials in place, it puts us in a position that with the right investment banking partner, we can do an uplist and expedite the process of getting either to NASDAQ small cap or New York Stock Exchange small cap. And that's where we're headed now. So within the next year or so, I think less than a year, we'll be qualified and we'll be moving up the ladder and putting ourselves in a position where institutions can get behind a really solid company in a space that still has a lot of upside in it.
And as a private investor now, you can buy your shares.
Yeah, you can buy shares on the open market. It's liquid. Every firm out there is you can buy at, unless they have a penny stock rule. If they have a rule that says no, you cannot buy a penny stock. Sometimes you have to put it in writing. It's a non-solicited letter. But E-Trade, Schwab, TD Ameritrade, Fidelity, all the major discount houses, you can buy and sell. I do know that places like Robinhood and a couple of the subs that are out there that are free trading for small investors, some of those, you just can't buy penny stocks through them at all. So we're still considered a penny stock, but with the Form 10 filed, we'll just be technically a penny if we're still less than a couple bucks.
And
so over time, we'll look to grow through that as well.
What's the ticker symbol?
EDXC. So Edward David X-Ray Charlie.
Right.
And the parent company is Endexx Corporation. Under Endexx Corporation, right now we have 10 wholly owned subsidiaries, of which CBD Unlimited is the active one, and Phytobites is our animal sciences that are the active ones. We have other assets that are associated with cannabis that also operate independently, but they all feed into Endexx as being 100% owner of all these entities.
So if somebody wanted to go ahead and buy a few shares now, they can do that. That's not.
Yeah, absolutely.
And what's the what's uh, the plan in the next 2 or 3 months as it relates, aside from getting your distributors to call on all the companies and get you further on the shelf? Uh, is there other marketing plans? And then there's a bunch of questions about direct investment in the company and that sort of thing.
Well, in the next 3 to 6 months, the next 3 months are going to be probably the most exciting for the company in its history. So our main distributor is really getting momentum going right now, and they're going to start. Uh, they'll most likely start announcing who their clients are that are picking up their product lines. So when they actually, if I put out a name that all the different stores that they get, it falls on deaf ears. But when the big company comes out and says, we're in this industry, these are our partners, and we're going to market, that's a much higher impact. And that is developing right now. So that'll be an event that takes place, and a big shout out to the industry. We want to dominate an industry, and this is one of our partners. So it's good credibility, and it's a great stamp of approval, and it puts us in front of all the major buyers as a serious contender. The second part is the DJ Khaled piece. DJ, we're just finishing. We finished all the formulations. We finished all the packaging. Everything's ordered. It's going into production, and then we are working with our marketing team that specifically works on that project to put ourselves in a position. It could be as early as late this month, but most likely it'll drift into April, where we make the big product brand name announcement and the product category announcement. We haven't told the public what that is yet. We know it's DJ Khaled, but we built his own brand name, and it's a line specifically for him and the people that he influences the most. So that's going to come out as its own project, and it's going to be loud, and it's going to get a tremendous amount of coverage. And in the end, that comes back to Endexx, the parent company, as look at what these guys got going on. This is a really big deal. So we're going to roll out e-commerce initially. Then we're going to do Father's Day. We'll call it a Father's Day package rollout. And then we're going to use the numbers from the e-commerce and the Father's Day launch to then go present out to mass retail. So then you're looking at, use hypotheticals like Walmart or Target or Walgreens. They could have their own stand that has the DJ Khaled new men's kit for a holiday special. So we're going to package it up like that, but still try to keep as much as we possibly can in e-commerce, so we maintain margins and a much higher profile through social content and social advertising.
Yeah, super exciting. So for the record, next week you'll all be getting an announcement about another conversation that we can talk more about how to directly invest in the company and more detail about and answer some of the questions we didn't get to today.
Yeah, and then we can talk mechanically about the company, where it's going, how we've built it, the opportunities that exist for the new shareholder. There are going to be some very nice options over the course of the next 60 days. There's going to be some new options to invest into the company. I'm going to use, prior to now, I've been doing all private placements. So 30 years in the business, I have a lot of relationships, and there's family offices and accredited investors that invest directly into the company. And those options are available. But the next level is after you file the Form 10 and you have all your SEC requirements, from a regulatory and a compliance standpoint, it's better to go through an investment bank. So then you can do more traditional financing, where you can have a lot of investors at one time investing instead of one at a time over time. So it'll be, for lack of better words, a secondary offering, and we'll tap into the new, under the Jobs Act, the Reg A and the different formats there. And then ultimately we'll be in a position where we could do a traditional financing, like an S3 shelf offering. So over time, when the company's doing well, the stock's trading really well in the open market, we can draw down on that success. Right now, if the stock goes up or down or any other way, it doesn't really benefit the company. It's good for the shareholders that are buying and selling to make profit. So it'll give us the tools necessary to grow the company, scale the company out, which our target right now is scale it out to about a $500 million revenue company in the next 5 years, and be able to support it along the way without having big retrenches or backfills.
Excellent. So I want to again thank Elton for introducing me. Thank you, Elton. You want to say something real quick? We just ran out of time here.
Oh, no problem. Yeah, it was very interesting. And I want to thank Todd for presenting his company and his background to us.
Yeah,
That's all.
super, super interesting. And I learned quite a bit more than I otherwise knew. And so I appreciate that very much. And I'm sure the group does. So just again, next week on Monday, you guys are all welcome to join and invite your friends. We'll talk more about with Todd about what's going on with the company and get more into the meat and potatoes of the investment and how that structure is going to be. Super appreciate, Todd, you sharing with us today. You have
My pleasure. It's fantastic.
Closing remark for the group?
Closing remark would be this, all these inventions and the way the industry is set up right now, it's a byproduct of lots of industries coming together. And the way I see the industry right now is there's more and more professionals coming to the industry. So it's going to become more and more professionally run. It could be a lot more cutthroat because these people have been through a lot as well. But the industry is starting to mature and it's getting into that accelerated growth phase. So where people think that, the market might be stuck, we're a $2-3 billion industry right now that's scheduled to be a $25 to $30 billion industry in the next 5 years. There's not many industries out there that have that type of growth potentials. Are we going to make more microchips? Yes, but the cost is going down. So every industry that's matured that's out there, it doesn't have the same growth potential. The whole world of hemp, cannabis, and everything associated with it has tremendous growth opportunity. And there are a lot of options out there to invest. There's a few that you're going to make really good money. That's not just part of the herd, not part of all tides. When the tide rises, all boats rise. Well, that's been the case right now for the last 6 years in the cannabis market. But now you'll start to see emerging companies really start to steal the show, and you'll see a roll up in the industry. You'll see consolidation. You'll see major consumer companies starting to make acquisitions as they see the numbers and math line up to something that's a good investment for them. And we've positioned our company to be a part of all of those things.
Yeah, exciting. Thank you for that. And thank you for sharing with us today. And to our friends on the call, as I always say, thank you for sharing the only thing you can't make more of, and that's your time today with us. Until next time, thank you.
Thanks, guys. Have a great day.
Okay.